It's a Tuesday morning in the winter of 1932. A man is standing on a sidewalk in front of a bank that did not open today. There's a paper notice tacked to the door. Behind that door is every dollar he ever saved, and he is never going to see a cent of it again. He did everything he was told to do. He didn't gamble. He didn't chase hot stocks. He worked, he saved, he put the money somewhere safe. And it's gone. 3 doors down, his neighbor, same street, same paycheck, same crash landing on the same week, walks through the next 4 years with her savings intact. She isn't smarter than him. She isn't luckier. She did one thing differently, and the gap between the two of them came down to a single number. My name's Ban, and I've read 100 years of financial history so you don't have to, because the savers who came through 1929, 1973, and 2008 did the same 2 or 3 things every time, and almost nobody is doing them today. By the end of this video, you'll know the exact number that separated the families who survived 1932 from the families who were wiped out. You'll know what that number turns into in today's money, and it lands lower than most people guess. And you'll be able to run a short, honest checklist on your own situation and see which side of that line you'd be standing on right now. Let's start with what the word safe even meant in 1932. Here's the part almost nobody tells you about the people who lost everything. Most of them weren't reckless. The wiped-out family on that sidewalk wasn't the villain of this story. He was the responsible one. He kept his money in a bank, the way you're supposed to. He stayed out of the casino that Wall Street had become in the 1920s. By every rule your grandparents were handed, he was doing it correctly. And that's exactly why this matters. The Depression didn't just punish the gamblers. It reached past them and took down the careful, the frugal, the by-the-book savers too. If a downturn only ever hurt reckless people, none of us would need to watch this. The uncomfortable truth is that being careful was not enough. Something else decided who kept their money and who didn't. So sit with the setup for a second. Roughly 9,000 banks, about 1 in every 3 in the entire country, shut their doors between 1929 and 1933. And here's the detail that changes everything. There was no deposit insurance. None. The FDIC didn't exist yet. It wasn't signed into law until June of 1933, and the coverage didn't switch on until January 1934. So when your bank failed before then, your money didn't get reimbursed. It didn't get partially recovered. It vanished. 1/3 of the banking system evaporated and took the savings inside it down with it. And here's the cruelty of it. A lot of those banks didn't fail because they were run by crooks. They failed because everyone showed up to withdraw at once. A bank lends most of your deposit out. It never has every depositor's cash sitting in the vault at the same time. So the moment enough neighbors panicked and lined up at the door, even a basically sound bank could be drained dry in an afternoon. The run itself became the cause of death, which means your money's safety didn't just depend on your choices or even your bank's choices. It depended on whether the strangers standing in line next to you kept their nerve. That is a terrifying amount of your life savings to hand over to a crowd. Which brings me to the one idea this entire video hangs on, so lock it in now. It was never about how much you had. It was about where you kept it. Run that through the story. The careful saver and his careful neighbor might have had the exact same amount of money. Same dollar figure, down to the penny. But one had it stacked in a single bank, and the other did not. One number, on paper, looked identical. In reality, one of them was solvent, and one of them was already ruined. They just didn't know it yet. Now, the gamblers got destroyed too, and it's worth seeing how, because the mechanism still exists today under new names. In the 1920s, ordinary people bought stocks on margin, which is a polite way of saying they bought with borrowed money. You could put down 10% and borrow the other 90% from your broker, who borrowed it from a bank. By 1929, the loans stacked up in those margin accounts, call loans, reached about $8.5 billion. That was more than all the physical currencies circulating in the United States at the time. An entire generation of investors was standing on 10% of their own money and 90% of somebody else's. That works beautifully in one direction only. The second prices fall, the broker calls the loan. You either wire in cash you don't have, or he sells your stock out from under you at the bottom. Forced selling drives prices down further, which triggers the next margin call, which forces the next sale. The leverage that made people rich on the way up turned them into forced sellers on the way down. They didn't choose to sell at the worst possible moment. The debt chose for them. Walk through one of those accounts and you can feel the trap close. A man puts down $100 and controls $1,000 of stock. The stock ticks up 10%, and on paper he's doubled his 100, because that $100 gain lands entirely on his tiny slice. He feels like a genius, so he does it again, bigger. Then the market slips 10% the other way. That same $100 move, in reverse, doesn't dent his position. It erases it. His entire stake is gone, and the broker wants the borrowed $900 back regardless. The leverage never cared which direction he was hoping for. It just multiplied whatever actually happened, and in the fall of 1929, what actually happened was down. So on the surface, in 1929, the leveraged investor looked like the smart one. He was up big on paper. He'd turned a little money into a lot. Right up until the market stopped cooperating, and then the same structure that lifted him ran in reverse and buried him. But here's what neither the careful saver nor the leveraged gambler could see coming. The careful saver thought his enemy was risk, so he avoided the stock market and felt safe. The leveraged gambler thought his enemy was caution, so he borrowed to the hilt and felt clever. They were both looking at the wrong thing. The market wasn't what wiped out the careful man. His own bank was. And it wasn't the size of the gambler's position that ruined him. It was the leverage underneath it, the fact that someone else could force him to sell. Not how much, where, and, just as important, whether someone else had a claim on it. That's the dividing line. On one side, families whose money was somewhere they controlled, that no failing institution and no lender could reach on short notice. On the other side, families whose money was technically theirs but sat inside something that could fail, freeze, or be called away. Same balance sheet on paper. Opposite outcomes in real life. Let me make that concrete with two households, because the numbers are where this gets real. Household A has $1,500 saved. In 1932, that's serious money. The average American family lived on about that for an entire year, because average family income had already collapsed roughly 40%, from around $2,300 in 1929 down to about $1,500 by 1933. So household A has a full year of living expenses banked, responsible, enviable even. But it's all in one bank, and the head of the household also carried a little margin debt from the good years he never fully unwound. Household B also has $1,500. Same number. But it's split up. Some of it is cash they can physically put their hands on. Some is spread across more than one institution. None of it is borrowed against. No margin, no leverage. Nobody else has a claim on a single dollar of it. Now the bank closes. It's one of the 9,000. Household A's $1,500 is behind that locked door. Gone. And the margin loan doesn't disappear just because the savings did. The debt outlives the asset. He is not down to zero. He is below zero. A year of savings erased, and a bill still to pay. Household B loses whatever was in the one institution that failed. But that's a slice, not the whole thing. The cash at home is untouched. The money in the second institution is untouched. There's no loan calling for repayment. Same $1,500 to start. One family is wiped out and in debt. The other family is bruised and still standing, and now take the same setup out to the countryside, because the farm families lived the harshest version of it. A farmer's wealth wasn't cash, it was land and equipment, bought partly on debt in the good years when crop prices were high. Then prices didn't just dip, they cratered, and his income to service that debt fell with them. The land was still technically his, but the mortgage on it wasn't reachable money, and it wasn't unleveraged, and it couldn't be split across two safer places. It was one big, illiquid, borrowed against bet on one thing. About a third of American farmers lost that bet and lost their land. Same disease as the man at the bank door. Everything in one place, and someone else holding a claim on it. Here's where it gets worse, because the pressure didn't stop at the bank door. Incomes were falling as all of this happened. Roughly 1 in 4 workers was unemployed by 1933, about a quarter of the entire labor force with no paycheck at all. Home foreclosures hit around 1,000 a day in 1933, and close to half of all home mortgages in the country were in default. About 1/3 of American farmers lost their land. This is a world where your income can drop 40%, your bank can vanish, and your mortgage payment stays exactly the same. Every one of those pressures rewards the same thing: money you control, that can't be frozen, called, or foreclosed out from under you. And every one of them punishes the family whose safety depended on a single institution staying open and a single paycheck staying steady. And there's a quiet twist inside all of this that made debt especially lethal in the 1930s. Prices were falling, deflation, which sounds almost pleasant until you owe money. Because your debt is written in fixed dollars. A $1,000 loan stays $1,000 even as wages, crop prices, and home values collapse around it. So every month, in real terms, the debt got heavier, while everything you could earn or sell to pay it got lighter. The saver with cash watched that same cash quietly buy more. The borrower watched his obligation quietly grow teeth. Same economy, pointed in opposite directions, depending entirely on which side of the ledger you were standing on. Zoom out, and the whole grim decade sorts people along that one axis. Not rich versus poor, not smart versus dumb, reachable versus trapped, owned outright versus owed against. Now, there's a version of this where I'm wrong. Let me show it to you, because you deserve the honest other half, not just the part that makes for a dramatic thumbnail. The 1930s were a deflation. Prices fell to about 1/3 of their old levels, which means cash actually gained purchasing power just by sitting still. That's rare. In most decades since, inflation quietly eats idle cash, and a family that hoarded dollars under the mattress for 30 years would have been slowly robbed by rising prices instead of a bank run. So if you take one lesson from 1932 and turn it into keep everything in cash forever, you've learned the wrong lesson, and I'd be lying to you if I let that slide. The point was never that cash is king. The point is that you need a reachable, unleveraged core you control. Enough of it, not all of it. And today, you're not walking into 1932 defenseless. Deposit insurance exists now. The FDIC covers up to $250,000 per depositor, per bank. That is a real backstop the man on the sidewalk never had. It genuinely changes the math, as long as you actually stay under the limit and don't pile everything past it into one institution and assume it's fine. So take the disclaimer plainly. I'm not your financial advisor, and this isn't personalized advice. Run your own numbers, ideally past someone licensed who knows your full picture. With all that said, here's the number. And I want to be careful about how I hand it to you, because the honest version isn't a single magic bank balance that made you bulletproof. There was no dollar figure that, once you crossed it, guaranteed you a soft landing. What the survivors had in common was closer to a threshold of reachable, unencumbered runway. Enough money you controlled to outlast the stretch where the banks were failing and the paychecks were gone. Cross that threshold, and time was on your side. Fall short of it, and you were one locked door away from zero. The families who survived 1932 intact generally had something close to a full year of living costs held in a form they controlled, reachable, spread out, and not borrowed against. In 1932 dollars, that dividing line sat right around $1,500 of genuinely liquid, unencumbered money. Below that line, with everything concentrated in one bank or levered in the market, families got erased. At or above it, spread and unleveraged, they made it through. $1,500 doesn't sound like a wall between survival and ruin until you translate it. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $35,000 today. About $35,000. Or, said the way that actually matters, somewhere near a year of your household's core expenses, sitting in cash and cash equivalents you can reach without asking permission, spread across more than one institution with nothing borrowed against it. And notice what that number is not. It's not your net worth. It's not the balance on your 401k, which you can't touch without penalty and can't spend during a crash without selling at the bottom. It's not the equity locked in your house. The 1932 line was never about the size of your total pile. Plenty of people who looked wealthy on paper got wiped out because none of that paper was reachable when the door locked. The line is about the specific slice you could actually put your hands on, that nobody else had a claim to. A person with a modest income and $35,000 of clean liquid runway was, by the only measure that mattered in 1932, safer than a person with a big portfolio and nothing they could reach. So here's how to find out, honestly, which side of it you're on. Don't answer these out loud to impress anyone. Answer them the way you'd answer if the bank doors were already locked. 1. Runway. Could you cover 6 to 12 months of your real expenses from money you can reach this week, without selling investments at a loss and without waiting on any single company to stay solvent? If yes, you're above the line on the first and most important test. If not, that's the first gap to close. 2. Concentration. Is more than a comfortable chunk of your liquid savings sitting in one single institution, especially anything parked above that $250,000 insured limit in one bank. The 1932 saver's entire fortune lived behind one door. How many doors is yours behind? 3. Leverage. Is anything you own borrowed against, margin on your brokerage account, or debt secured by assets that can be called or sold out from under you if prices drop? That's the exact wire that turned 1929's winners into forced sellers. If the answer is more than 0, you're carrying the gambler's risk, not the saver's. 4. Diversification. If you sketched your entire net worth on a napkin, is it basically one thing? All in stocks, or all in your house, or all in one employer? The family that survived wasn't the one with the biggest single pile. It was the one whose eggs weren't all in the institution that failed. 5. Income shock. If your household income fell 40% tomorrow, the actual drop families lived through from 1929 to 1933, could you still make every fixed payment for a year? Not comfortably, just at all. Answer those 5 honestly and you'll know your number, and you'll know your structure. And structure is the thing that saved people. Because step back 100 years and the pattern is almost boring in how consistent it is. 1929, 1973, 2008, 3 completely different disasters, with 3 different causes and 3 different villains. In 1929, it was a banking collapse and margin debt. In 1973, it was the opposite problem. A long stagflation grind where inflation and a brutal bear market chewed up anyone who was forced to sell stock to cover the bills, and rewarded anyone who had a cash cushion to spend from instead of liquidating at the lows. In 2008, it was housing and credit, and the people who got destroyed were, again, the forced sellers. Households so levered against a house or a portfolio that a price drop triggered a margin call or a foreclosure they couldn't refinance their way out of. Different eras, different headlines. And in every single one, the households that came through did the same 2 things. They held a reachable cushion they controlled, so they were never forced to sell at the bottom, and they carried little or no leverage, so nobody else could make the selling decision for them. That's the whole survival kit. The tools change names: savings account, money market, high yield, FDIC. The 2 moves underneath never change at all, so picture the next time the line gets drawn, and there will be a next time, because there's always a next time. Some family on your street rides it out with their savings and their sleep intact. Another one, with the same income and the same paycheck, gets erased. The only question that's ever really up for grabs is which one is you. You don't get to pick when the door locks. You only get to pick, right now, while it's open, whether your money is reachable and yours, or trapped and owed. That's the whole job of this channel. Run the math the brochures leave out, and check it against how money has actually behaved when things fell apart. If knowing the line between survival and ruin got your attention, the next one goes one level deeper. Not where the line is, but how fast a family can cross back over it once they know the number. That's the sequel. Everything in this video has already happened. To other people. Your job is to make sure it doesn't happen to you.